Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This video is part of a playlist on AKS Networking, and this is part 2 of the egress option with AKS. In the first video, we did egress via Azure Firewall, and so we'll pick up where we left off. We had a few steps remaining there, and then we'll take a closer look at the NAT gateway egress. Okay, so let me just show you a quick overview of my screen here. So this is the bigger part. This is the series that we are in. In the last section, in the last video, we did Azure Firewall. And today we'll finish where we left off, and then we'll look at the NAT gateway option. And if you're navigating the draw IO, this is the scenario for egress. All right, so with that, let me jump back into VS Code, and we'll pick up where we left off. So here we are. If you remember, we kicked off this DNAT rule, and I had mentioned that after you create the DNAT, everything should work. So I want to show you a scenario, an interesting scenario that I ran into. So let me show you what happened after. So here you could see that my NAT command succeeded, and after that, I kicked off, I got my firewall's public IP, and then I did a curl command again, and you can see that it said couldn't connect to the server. So at that point, I had expected it to work, like I mentioned in the previous video. However, it failed. So when I did a kget nodes O wide, I got that my nodes were not ready. So troubleshooting further, I want to show you why this happened. So if you remember, we when we did the update for the authorized IP ranges, we had updated it with just the command before was we had just updated it with my current IP. And so what it did was it removed the firewall's IP. So we needed to do a comma separated, authorized ranges. So let me show that to you in the portal as well. So in the portal, you'll see, let me close this. So in the portal, you will see here that I'm in the AKS cluster, the networking section, and you can see that you only have one IP, and we are missing the IP of the firewall. So let's go ahead and add that. And we'll verify that it indeed does that in the portal as well. So this may take a few minutes again, but this was something that I wanted to share with you. So we'll do a little bit of the firewall, and then we'll dive into the NAT. Now, given this will take a few minutes, let's jump back in here, and we'll talk about the NAT gateway as well. So if you remember, in my in the brownfield environment, I do have a NAT gateway already created. You see that my NAT gateway is already created, and it is not yet associated with any subnet. So we will associate that. I haven't created the NAT. I haven't created that setting yet. I just have the NAT gateway created. And the second thing I want to show you here is that, let's jump back in here, is that let's say that you had this option set up, right? So instead of outbound via, you had the outbound set up through the firewall, and you want to change it to the outbound via NAT gateway. So you want to egress using the NAT gateway instead of the firewall. So I have put a link to documentation where you can use these. So let me zoom a little bit more. And here it shows you that, let's focus on this section of interest. Here it shows you that if you had user defined, of course, this is for BYO and this is for managed. So in our case, it's BYO. It says if you have user-defined routing and you want to go to NAT gateway, user-defined NAT gateway, it is supported. So we could just migrate from Azure Firewall, so user-defined routing to use NAT gateway, but we're going to create the cluster from scratch. Okay, so just want to show you that the migration paths are available, and if you click on this, and there is a link directly to our documentation. All right, so let's go see. Okay, great. So our authorized ranges are updated. We will again validate it in the portal here. Let's go see our network option. Let's refresh the screen. There, now we have the 2 comma separated IPs in the authorized range. So let's go back, look at our kget nodes command again. And now they all look ready. All right. So I thought that was an interesting scenario to kind of check it out. So now let's go see what our firewall public IP is. And that's our firewall public IP. And now let's hit it. There, it is a successful connection. Again, remember this is the firewall's public IP. And if we did do the load balancer's public IP, it would still fail, right? So let me just make sure. And now again, this is the service IP. This is the service IP of the, oops, let's just make sure we are getting the right service IP. So storefront, and we'll echo the service IP. Okay, so we should have used this one here. And that would still fail. So again, the load balancer will fail, and the load balancer fails and the firewall succeeds. Okay, cool. So that is the end of our previous session. And I want to show you the link to the asymmetric routing issue. I do have it right here in the draw.io. So if you look at the draw.io, there is a link to the issue with asymmetric routing up here at the top. So, oops, let me just make sure that I have the right link here. So if you go in the asymmetric routing section, it talks about the specific issue. So let's zoom in a little bit, and it talks about that specific issue that we have. And if you click on it, it takes us to the Azure documentation where it mentions that there is an issue with the asymmetric routing. And then this is where, if you click on this link, it shows you this how to fix this. Okay, and that's what we did. We did that DNAT. All right, so now let's go ahead and delete this cluster that we did with Firewall Egress. So we'll go into the Kubernetes cluster, and then we'll delete this cluster. So while the cluster is getting deleted, I want to show you a couple of flows here for the NAT gateway. So let's jump back in here. Okay. And So today, again, the main topic for today is using the NAT gateway. And the placement of the NAT gateway can be done two ways. One is you could attach and this is what we're going to do today, you could attach the AKS subnet to the NAT gateway. And the other way to do it is, like I said, you could put the NAT gateway in front of the firewall. All right, so, but today we're going to do the egress option. So the outbound type would be the NAT gateway. So that question often comes up. So, and that's that. And so and the inbound flows would still come in. It would still come in through the load balancer, and we wouldn't have any asymmetric routing issue because there's no firewall. So egress would work fine, and the inbound flows. So with NAT gateway, let me just fix this. So with NAT gateway, you would just have the inbound coming in directly to the load balancer. Okay, no asymmetric routing issue there. And the other thing, while we wait for the cluster to be deleted, is that I'll show you a quick update on how you would go about installing the NAT gateway, deploying the NAT gateway. So the first thing that you would do is you will make sure, and I did this already, and we can try it again, is that, let me find the NAT gateway section here. Yes, is that you will associate, right? You will associate the NAT gateway with the subnet in question. All right, so we will make sure that we've already created the NAT gateway, but we will update the subnet to be associated with it. So remember, I mentioned that when you set up the the networking for the subnet, when you look at the association for the subnet, let's open the subnet one more time. We look at the AKS subnet in question. And if you look at the subnets here, you'll see that currently it's associated with the firewall route table. And the firewall route table, of course, is pointing to the Azure firewall. So this is the change we're going to first make. We're going to change this to be associated with the NAT gateway because we have an existing NAT gateway. So remember to remove this and then change this. So that's how it's going to be done. So now let's take a quick look to make sure that our cluster is no longer there. Let's refresh this. There, we don't have the cluster. We'll just verify the resource group to make sure everything's clean. No AKS resource group. This is the resource group where the firewall is deployed, firewall and the NAT gateway. It doesn't have any of the cluster. So let's go ahead and kick off the cluster. So before we kick off the cluster, apologize for jumping around here, but we're going to associate the subnet. You could do it two ways. You could go in the subnet itself. So let's go in the subnet itself, and we will remove the route table and we'll add the NAT gateway. All right, so then it's ready for the cluster to be deployed. So let's go ahead and kick off the cluster. Again, all of the creation of the NAT gateway associations, all of that could be done using PowerShell. But since we're using the same script for NAT gateway and AKS, I did delete that manually. All right, so we're ready to do this. and I'll talk about the key points over here, is that again, the outbound type is the key over here. The plugin is Azure CNI, and we are going to deploy the max pods of 30 3-node cluster, and that's what the deployment is going to look like. And once we have the cluster deployed, when you do it with the NAT gateway, you will not run into all of these asymmetric routing issues. So these are specific to the firewall deployment. So let me make a note of this: firewall deployment only. So error shows up only when you have the firewall deployment. So some of the errors that we saw before only shows up when, and I do not have, so remember, in the case of the firewall, I did have the API server authorized ranges. So we ran into that issue where we couldn't connect to the cluster. Here, I don't have the authorized ranges. But if you do include that, then you would have to make sure that all of your, for your kubectl to succeed, you need to allow your IP that you're coming from. So, all right. And to close this out, I want to show you how I have done all of these diagrams. So let's say that so if you look at the fully populated architecture, if you look at the fully populated draw IO, what I have done is, I have included all of the screen captures over here so that if you don't need to deploy the cluster, you want to see how the output looks like or what it looks like in the portal. So for example, if we go and look at the backend pools of or the NAT creation, all of these is included over here. So you don't need to deploy the cluster just to check what the output is going to look like. So do leverage that should you need to, and you can modify it for your customers. For your customer scenario. I mentioned some of the key design points over here, and all of these are hyperlinked. So should you need to look at the outbound rules, you can click here. And should you need to look at this particular, this is our Azure documentation of the firewall scenario. So you could go in there as well. So let's hide all of this, see if our cluster creation was successful. If not, this is pretty straightforward. One way to validate this is when you run that network pod, that test pod, it would egress using the NAT gateway's IP. So let's take a quick look at what our cluster is still running. And we will look at the NAT gateway one more time and capture its outbound IP. All right, so we expect our NAT gateway, when we run the curl command again, we expect that to egress using that. So let's get ready for our sample deployment. There our so what we saw, I just captured the IP. So what we saw was this was the NAT gateway IP. So let's go ahead and deploy this network tools pod. So if you know, the network tools pod is nothing but a busy box. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, I already have the network tools pod. So let's go ahead and let's validate. So get pods dash override. Oh, we are still getting we're still not able to connect. Interesting. So let's go ahead and test that. So we are unable to connect, no such host. All right, so we do have to connect to the cluster. This is the old cluster. I apologize. So we missed one step here. So what we did was we just created this. I got too excited to check the outbound. So let's go ahead and first connect to the cluster. So there we go. So we'll connect to the cluster. because this is a new cluster for with the user-defined NAT gateway. And then we'll go KGET. There we have our nodes in the node network. And we should be able to now deploy the pods. We can now do the kget pods command again. And there's our, it's a running state, and there's our pod in the same network as the node network. Again, remember this is the CNI. I mentioned this in the previous session. So CNI, the node, and the pod network are in the same subnet. And all right, so now there is a moment of truth. So we exec into the pod. Let's run IP adder one more time just to be absolutely sure we are in the right pod. And there's the pod IP. And now it's the moment of truth. And there, this is the IP of the NAT gateway that we had also documented over here. So we are officially egressing through the NAT gateway, and we'll still go ahead and deploy this sample application to make sure that there is no asymmetric routing type issue here. Oops, let me exit out of the pod. So for completeness, we will deploy this service on the load balancer. So essentially right now it's pending a public IP, but we are waiting for the public IP to come up so we can finish this inbound flow. Okay, so we are egressing from this pod is egressing using the NAT gateway. That was a network tools pod that we just tested. And this is the inbound traffic. The green arrow shows the inbound traffic. So let's go see if we got an IP. It's still pending an IP. So we'll wait for a few seconds. And then once we have the IP, we don't expect any kind of asymmetric routing in this scenario. And again, for completeness, you can see that there are some errors that I have documented over here. We did this in the first section, and then finally to clean up everything, you can delete this resource group. There we have the public IP. So let's do a quick Control C out of this. Let's get the service IP of the storefront application. Again, I just got that application from our GitHub content. And there we have this service IP. So let's connect to it using that IP instead. And we can do a curl. So there we have a 200 OK over here. If you want to see what this looks like in a portal, it's a 3-tier application. Let me quickly show you that. And there we have a 3-tier application running on our AKS cluster with ingress using load balancer, egress using the NAT gateway. Thank you again for watching and joining me. I enjoyed this session, delivering these sessions, and drop me a comment and let me know if you have any questions or if you'd like to see more videos on any specific topic, let me know. Thank you and have a great day.